Welcome to the Arts Lunch at United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities. I'm the Assistant Professor and Program Director of Theology and the Arts here at United, and really excited to have the artist Daniel Arzola with us today. We'll share about his work and kind of theory of Artivism as well. I will do the screen sharing set up this for you, so you can just.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Before beginning with my talk, I always like to say something to feel more comfortable. And it's like in Spanish, I feel like Superman, but in English, I'm just Clark Kent. So I'm gonna try my best. If you speak more than one language, you will understand that we have different personalities in our language. But I believe in communication, and that's the reason why I am an artist and why I define myself as an artivist. The concept of artivism was used at the late time of the 20th century, just to refer as all the artistic expression that used to have a social meaning or like explicit social content. But for me, art is always social since the beginning of art, since the prehistoric era and till the Egyptians. Every time we pay attention to an artistic expression, we can understand a lot about the society, the time, and when that was created. So when I talk about artivism, I don't talk about just art with explicit social content. I talk about accessibility, I talk about representation, and I talk about art, the accessibility of art, because art is not always accessible. In my case, I grew up in Venezuela, in a very small town, and I never had access to big libraries, cinemas, art galleries, museums, nothing like that. Like in order to go to places like that, I had to take like a travel to big cities. And sadly, that's the way that art works in a lot of places, like only like the big cities used to have. I think that's changing in some places in the world, but still we need to make art more accessible to everybody. And I define my work as artivism because I create art in a medium that cannot be destroyed. When I was a teenager, my work used to be destroyed a lot because my identity is not valid in the society where I grew up. And the identity of LGBTQ people, when we are visible, that's translated as something immoral. And that's the reason why the invisible can cost you sometimes even your life. That was the reality of the generation behind me. That was the reality of my generation. And sadly, it's the reality of the generations that are growing up in this moment in Venezuela. And I like to talk about representation in art because I think art has the power to change the shape of culture and the way we perceive others. I think art has this quality that make us feel admiration for the capacity of other individuals that we don't know. Sometimes when we are in front of someone with a beautiful voice or with a beautiful poem or an artwork that make us feel something or make us think, art have that quality to reconnect us with the sensitive side of the world. And the difference for me between the traditional activism and the artivism is that the activism needs the activist to be there, needs the word of the person to be there. And the artivism just needs symbols that help us to recognize us and create a community. I created in Venezuela what became the first LGBT campaign to appear in the media. And thank you so much. And the name of that project is I'm Not a Joke. And the name in Spanish is No Soy Tu Chiste. And the name from that project came because in the last 2 centuries, the only representation of queer people in the media is only to make jokes. They used to use this stray actor, they put a dress on him, and they just erase completely the trans identity. They make you believe like being trans or being gay is the same. They just transform the queer experience as a joke, and they never show the human side. They always show the stereotype. Like the characters never have family, they don't fall in love, they don't suffer, they only been there like to be the buffoon. And that translates into a society, like when they recognize you are different, even when before you are prepared to recognize yourself, they mock your identity. So I grew up since I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, being bullied and seeing my names on the walls of my neighborhood besides homophobic slurs, just because they recognized that I was different. And that's what happened a lot in Venezuela when they realized that you are not cisgender or heterosexual. And I decided to create I'm Not a Joke to respond to that because for me as an artist, I just want to put messages outside that people don't used to say enough. And I grew up listening like, oh, but your sexuality is a trend now. Everybody is gay now. Everybody is trans because it's so trendy right now. And it's like, no, what is trendy is your ignorance. Because our sexuality or our identity are not trends. It's not trendy, are not decisions. Or, oh no, that person, when I was a teenager, I survived, I hate crime. Some neighbors tied me to an electrical pole and they tried to burn me with cigarettes and they destroyed all my works. In that moment, I understood that art can be fragile because what can take you it can take you, a month to finish a painting. It can take you a week to finish an illustration. And someone can destroy that just in 1 minute. And it only takes a match to mark your skin forever. So I wanted to create my work on a medium that people cannot destroy. And that's why I use digital illustration to create my my work. How can I, I want to change there. Over.
That, and then you'll do line 0. Yeah.
Yes. I wanted to put these messages in posters, and I decided to create digital illustration because if someone destroys my work, I can replace it. So the spirit of my work is indestructible. And I call that Artivism because it's not only indestructible, but it's accessible to everybody. Now that we live in a connected world, you don't need to be here in United with us to appreciate my work. And that way, the I'm Not a Joke project is today translated in 20 languages. Because I think Artivism is about create symbols that allow us to communicate and identify ourselves in culture. And sometimes I think when you don't have the chance to reflect yourself, to see yourself in the books, in the movies, in the songs that talks about the way you fall in love, your identity is just a mystery. It's just like a bunch of fragments that you spend a life trying to recognize who you are. And I think for queer people, that happens a lot because we, our identity was basically erased or misunderstood for so many centuries that now it's like we are finally having generations where, kids are recognizing themselves. And identity is so important because identity is just the knowledge that we have about ourselves. And nobody teach us that. Like we need to learn that at some point, but knowing you is the best tool that you can have to transit a turbulent reality. These are pieces of the I'm Not a Joke project. I created 50 illustrations. I used phrases from poems that I wrote when I was a teenager. And it was just based on my personal experience growing up in Venezuela. What happened with this was that I had the chance to share it on Facebook, on Tumblr, recipes, Tumblr. Twitter, and people from all over the world started sharing that. First were my friends, then the friends of my friends, and then people was sharing that and saying like, oh wow, I was attacked my whole life, or I had this conversation with someone and the person was attacking me, and I wish I had like the chance to respond this. And sometimes we don't have like the right answer at the right moment because we are not prepared. Sometimes we learn how to run while we are being chased. And that was my reality in Venezuela. So the I'm Not a Joke project is translated right now into 20 languages, and I have the chance to exhibit this in museums, galleries, bus stations. Like in this moment, thanks to the LGBT Center of Lyon in France, I'm Not a Joke is on the streets of Lyon in France and bus stations. Also, I have a permanent exhibition in the subway of Buenos Aires. I had the chance to take my work to the subway of New York. And for me, as this little queer person growing up in a very poor neighborhood in Venezuela, having my work in the subway of New York just made me feel that I won the battle finally. And if you ever have the chance to visit Buenos Aires, please go to the line H of the subway, or just ask for the J subway station. And someone can take you there and you can say, oh, that person was having work with me once. And he said he was like sarcastic in English. Yeah, it's very big. We use meters in Latin America and not inches, but it's 14 meters. I don't know like how much is that, but it's a very big mural. The people used to try to destroy it a lot, especially there are two brides. This was a project that I had for the San Francisco 8 Foundations in 2020. It was one of the last campaigns I designed. This is the mural, and this is Carlos Jauregui. Carlos Jauregui was an activist that organized in the 80s the first LGBT pride in Argentina. He was also the president of the first civil rights association to talk about queer civil rights in Argentina, and he was a visionary. That's why the name of this mural is the voice that opened the way, because he was someone that was talking about marriage equality and trans identity laws even in the 80s, when people perceived him on the television as like a pariah, as someone like as the enemy, as an immoral person, just for being visible during that time. he was a victim of AIDS. I think he died in '96. But the Carlos Jauregui subway station, I think it's the only one in the world that have the name of a civil rights activist and a victim of AIDS. And it's the first and the only LGBT subway station in Latin America. So yeah, this mural was, it was my way to pay tribute to him, because there is a lot of LGBT leaders out there, and sometimes history forget about them. Like, not everybody can be Harvey Milk, and sometimes we just talk about Harvey Milk, and I think that's great, but there is so many wonderful people doing stuff out there, and we need always also to embrace those people, because that's the only way we can build queer history. And I like to talk a lot about Kid Haring, because I think when I was a little kid, he was my biggest inspiration. Like I saw like, oh, I can talk about things like this with my art, you know? Like during the 90s, I grew up watching and seeing campaigns about how people with HIV, they were like big black scorpions on the bed of another person, and they always represent like people living with HIV, like monsters that they hide a secret. So even in the 80s, Kid represents like, so in a way so powerful and beautiful, these messages. And I think for me, it was a big impact to know that you can talk about things like that with your art. And that art will be also like this colorful and sometimes even simple. But the most important is to transmit a message, because art is communication. So I dedicate myself since the last 7, 8 years to travel the world and talk about Artivism, and to make exhibitions, and to work on my own theory of Artivism, because this project was my final project in art school. I remember I wanted to do something that could be transcendent, and because I think that's the main quality of art. Art transcends and can connect worlds, ages, cultures, and bring people together. So I think that if you grow up in a violent society, you can get trapped in the cycle of violence. But if you don't break the cycle of violence, the cycle of violence breaks you. So that's why I decided to transform everything in art, because art can transcend, and art is knowledge. And that's why I do what I do. I had to leave my country because of that 8 years ago, but I found the world that I knew exists out there. And every time my work is shared and celebrated by people, I just remember that, yeah, like you have the power to change your reality, and my work saved my life. So my name is Daniel. For me, it's important, if you want to be my friend, to call me Daniel. You have a name like that for woman here, so you can feel free to call me Daniel. And it's something very basic, but it's also essential to being able to recognize yourself in the sound of your name. So, yeah, my name is Daniel Arzola, and I'm an artist.
I have lots of time for questions, so thanks, Molly. Yeah, will you take some questions?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Yeah, here, if I do the stop share, then you can see. You'll be able to see folks talking. So yeah, anybody comments or questions in the chat, or you can unmute too. Well, obviously you in person don't have to unmute. You can just speak. We're so plugged into, like you said, everything virtual.
Yes. Someone raise their
Jacques,
hand.
Jacques, go ahead.
Hi, Danielle. Thanks for visiting us today. My question is about, sorry, I'm off video, but I look like garbage. My question is about this idea of art transcending,
Mhm.
which to me kind of embodies the sort of art living outside of itself. So this idea of art transcending, but as well, this like want and desire for art not to be able to be destroyed. Because to me, there's like a little bit of a conversation between the temporariness of art, and then the choice to make it like permanent or unable to be destroyed. Like, what is that conversation for you, or what does that relationship sort of embody in your work?
I think both are valid. I think you can, it's depending always on the intention of the artist. And you know, this is a conversation that a lot of people in history had, not only you and me, since philosophers, from psychologists, from artists, architects, there are people that, you know, try to say like, oh no, art is only what the institution says art. And then there's other people like, oh, art is only what transcends, or you know, I think, and of course we have the conversation about the market of art, that is another complete different world with a lot of toxicity and things like that. But I think is valid. I think it depends on the intention of the artist. I think if you, sometimes you, for the situation you're living or the use that you want to give to your creation, that you know can have a piece, artistic creation that would only last, I don't know, a week. Sometimes when you just do a traditional mural on the streets, you know, and someone destroy it, it's like, yeah, maybe the person did that with an intention, but it's always going to depend on the context and the intention of the artist. But I think for me, I think about the transcendency of art, because that was the way I think I learned. I grew up being very isolated with no references about people like me. So I found that in people from, you know, other generations. I found that in Keith Haring, I found that in the poetry of Federico Garcia Lorca, in the, you know, the books of Reinaldo Arenas, talking about the dictatorship in Cuba. I found that with Virginia Woolf, in Orlando, and especially because I came from a place where we don't have representation. For me, creating memory and thinking about art that can transcend is my main intention. I think just for that.
Is that Alex? Wrote a question in the chat. Who do you know personally that has greatly impacted your work, and why?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, it's gonna be a cliche, but as a queer person, I can say Madonna saved my life.
Awesome.
Because when I Met a Joke was viral, I was just working with a lot of activists around the world. And then one day someone tweet about my work and say, this is art, this is no joke. And that person was Madonna. So I think thanks to that, I have the chance to escape from Venezuela. And it's a beautiful cliche because I can say, oh, Madonna saved my life. I understood in that moment, like the power of Madonna, like the power of someone with, you know, the power of another human being. But she only tweeted about my work, and she included my work in her website for a while. But I received in a week, like, I don't know, maybe 28 interviews. And I think thanks to that was the reason why I'm Not a Joke was in the media in my country. not because I was a good artist or because my message was important. It's because the media want to talk about why Madonna was talking about a Venezuelan artist. And I use that space to show my work and to, to people now in Venezuela, when they have characters making fun of them on television, they use I'm not a joke to fight back. And yeah, I think that was super powerful. And then in 2017, I received this invitation from local TV to participate in an event. And the surprise of the night was that they were awarding me, they were giving an award to me that night. And I was at the same table with Cyndi Lauper and Debra Messing. And when I was a kid, I used to watch videos of Cyndi Lauper at night in Nickelodeon and just type like a sheet on my waist and dancing the songs.
Yeah.
And I was punished in my house for doing that. And then even I was, even my mom was violent with me just for doing that. And then one night I was sitting next to Cyndi Lauper in New York. And I was like, well, life is beautiful. And karma is a bitch.
That needs to get another poster, I think. Like, beautiful.
Yeah, so those were moments that I feel like a full circle connection with my story and my work.
Yeah.
And of course, I make like the gays from the 80s feel very jealous because I met the icons. from the 80s.
Yeah. That's awesome.
I saw Elizabeth also put a question in the chat. What does it mean the most to you to be a queer artist? What advice do you have for other artivists?
Well, for me, to be a queer artivist means that I don't know if I feel it as a responsibility, but at least emotionally is the way I go with my work. And it's like I feel maybe the need to tell the stories of the things we are facing. Because the things I faced in Venezuela are not only the things that I faced. Like the people like me is still facing that. And I need to talk about that. For example, there is a lot of things that people say about Venezuela, but people don't say enough, like there are no antiretroviral medicines in Venezuela since 2013. And every year, more than 5,000 people died of AIDS, like we are living in the beginning of the 90s, because the government, the dictatorship, just put in prison all the activists that made visible this situation. And people is dying of AIDS in Venezuela in this moment, like the beginnings of the pandemic of AIDS. And we are still living in places where that is happening. So to me, as a queer activist or a queer artivist, I need to talk about that with my work. I need to leave evidence of the things we are facing and the things we are living. And my advice for another artivist is like, you have the power to tell your story. You have the power to tell your reality, because history is used to be written by those that won wars, but an artist can be anybody that just one day put some ideas together and bring a message and people get it, and then we build community.
A couple questions, kind of a building off of or follow-up to that question that you just spoke into. But one thing I was just like really moved and struck by was how you talked about your artwork and being like this moment of it being destroyed, or that experience of it being destroyed, but also the connection between that and your own physical self, like our skin and artwork being something that is like, it is very precious and fragile and I would say like sacred. And I think about, this summer, I'm not a frontlines activist, but I got involved in frontlines activism and noticed like
this is very hard on people's bodies. To have these moments of resistance where you're like throwing your body on the front lines and sort of like recapitulating trauma sometimes. There's a high cost to doing activism. And something really beautiful and inspiring about your work is that it is still has like a very far reach and impact, but in terms of accessibility, it's a way to enter that conversation and not have to be like physically risking yourself or emotionally risking yourself
Yes.
in that like in that moment of confrontation. So something that's just occurring to me, and I'm wondering along the lines of what Elizabeth brought up, like how do you in like this ecosystem of activism, like how are you interacting with other activists who might be doing that more confrontational work or policy work, for example? Like what kind of exchanges do you have with them, or like how do you see each other's work working together? Because the pace of those of like making art and the pace of like being at a protest all the time are like there's like very different energies and vibes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just kind of curious about what that looks like for you.
Yeah, well, you talk about something that I used to talk a lot also on my lectures, and it's like what happened when the activism is criminalized. And I work a lot because that's the reality in Venezuela too, but I also work before with activism from Russia, like where if they exhibit a rainbow flag, they just can go to jail just for doing that. So what people used to do is just you put the poster on the wall and you run away, but the message is there and help people to recognize each other. Because sometimes when you are living in realities where your life is in danger just for expressing your ideas, sometimes you need to play with those rules because you can't, we don't need more martyrs, you know, like we don't need more people. And sometimes you just can, that's the importance of recognizing ourselves with symbols. Because that way, especially in places with a lot of authoritarianism, in dictatorship and things like that, we need to find like ways to recognize each other and to share a message. And of course, I have been in touch with a lot of human rights activists from my generation in Venezuela. I'm not a joke, is still part of the march. When people go to march, you still use some of my artwork and things like that. But in some realities, just put in the poster and run away. It's just like that.
And follow-up question is, I'm curious about the folks, like the stories and the people that are represented in your art, whether those are people you know or kind of
Yes.
like they are people. Okay.
Yes, they are people. Some of them, well, there are a couple of self-portraits. There are friends from my childhood. There are other people that just share my work and get like actively involved with I'm Not a Joke. And I was like, okay, now I need you to transform to you in one of the posters. For example, I have a poster to talk about the freedom of religion. And that person, it was a Brazilian student that organized my first exhibition in Canada. He was also the first person in having like a tattoo of my work.
Wow, nice.
So,
Permanent. Yeah, that's
so when I met him, I was like, okay, we need to take this because we have a conversation about how is religion weaponized in Latin America and to use against people. And something that I like about this country is that we can find spaces like this where you can say, no, religion should be like a place just to bring people together and not to exclude people and not to, to put these relationships of power against people, over people. So we were talking about that and I was okay, I need to make a poster about this and you are the model. So sometimes it's just like that. Thank you for the question.
thinking about process too, like that, you know, sometimes you have, like you said, the text from your poems or these kinds of statements, but the nice thing about digital media too is like sometimes those portraits, those images exist without, you know, I've seen some versions where the text is there and sometimes the text isn't there. How do you think about that? I guess with the I'm Not a Joke campaign, like, you know, it has this purpose, and so the text is important because it's kind of like a public, you know, awareness raising or like this protest, right? I guess I'm curious how you think about text, the use of text in the design of your work, and I don't know, it seems like it shifts something from maybe portraiture to something else when you add the text. I don't have like a direct question, but like, I was like, I thought maybe a question would come up as I did it, but like, could you say more? More.
No, yeah, it makes sense to me because you know what? People used to ask me that.
Yeah.
People used to ask me if my work is always the construction of a portrait and a
Yeah.
phrase. And it's not always, I think it's only when I want to create a campaign. Like, and when I say a campaign, it's to create something that people can share, especially during times where something is, you know, where prejudice is getting like a lot of feel. And when I want the message to be, I think, more clear, like you can use the artwork to fight back. I include text on that because I want the message to be like more clear. But sometimes the image can communicate.
Yeah.
You know, for example, this illustration with this person suspended with the moon. I don't need any words because the image just can say what I want to say. So for me I'm just thinking about the message, how the message, if I want the message to be more in your face, or if I just want you to have an intimate moment where you can reflect on the world.
Yeah, some of those, like that one in particular, I think of that are very poetic kinds of images.
Thank you.
Probably have, thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, question. In other words, what does it mean to interpret text and visual media with the vibrant colors and shapes you use?
Well, I don't know. I think that depends on the person that is in front of the artwork, because I know from the place I'm talking. I don't know from the place you're listening.
Yeah.
I think there's something to be said for like that vibrant colors and the shapes in the abstract to kind of remove, but also include. You know, it's more inclusive to bring in the audience, but it also kind of removes you from like, you know, yeah, just I don't know, I love it. I love the colors. I love all of it. Honestly, I love colors.
Yeah, for me, color is important because for me, color is the mood of the artwork. Like the melody can be the mood in music. For me, color is that information. Is telling you the emotion of the artwork, and for me, is important that color can makes you feel something. So I think more than the shape, I think the color is more important in my style or in my creations than the shape.
Yeah.
That definitely stood out to me or struck me when I first saw all the painting or all your work on the walls. Just I felt like it was something I could take to my. I just came out as queer last year, and you know, I feel like the community I grew up in, it's definitely you know, pretty homophobic community, and I feel like these are just felt like something I could be like, see, there's so much beauty in this. You know, the colors are like, there's no doubt that this person is shining right now, or like, so like rising above the oppression of that. And like, there's all that, it just felt like, there's just like, in like a second, there's like a million things that kind of were relayed in your work. So mostly just like so much gratitude for your work.
Thank you,
Yeah.
and thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
But you know, as exactly as you said, like, see, like, I exist and people like me exist and people like me did amazing things in the world. Like, to me, as a teenager, I became like a story hunter to look in history, queer people. And it took me a while, but when I found them, I was like, I knew I was right, you know? I knew we're not living in a flat world. But sometimes you have everybody saying like, oh yeah, the world is flat. And it's very difficult to leave those realities in one piece, because sometimes like the wounds leave marks on you. And I think that's the reason why we have so many issues with mental health in the queer community, because when your identity is like the punch bag, no matter how strong you are, no matter how successful you can be, sometimes the scars are there.
Speaking of mental health, I was curious, have you ever like worked with or contracted with the Trevor Project here in the United States?
Not with them, I
Okay.
know them, but I have been working with It Get Better
Okay.
since 2014. And they helped me to take, I'm not a joke, to at least 8 countries.
Awesome.
And we had activity for the Hispanic Heritage Month with It Get Better and Twitter allies on Twitter, like maybe like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. Cool.
Any last burning comments or questions? Also speaking in my next class, so I want to give you time to eat lunch.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, if there's no other comments, questions, just join me in thanking Danielle.
Yeah.
And the exhibit will be up through the end of the semester, so come and check it out in person if you're local. Thanks to Cheryl Schweihart for being amazing and helping me with the exhibit. Getting it up. There's a smile, almost a smile. And then the artist talk will be just next week, next Tuesday night. We'll have a little reception and hear some more about the exhibit. So yes, it's going to be wonderful. So thanks so much for your time and thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you.